Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to this penultimate session at Change Now. And we're certainly keeping the knotty, complex conversations for this last conversation. My name's Ella Stopford-Sackville. I'm a managing director at Kite Insights. We work with organizations to develop the clarity, confidence, and capabilities to engage on pressing issues of our time: sustainability, climate, social issues. And I'm delighted to be moderating this evening's conversation. We're going to be talking about how do we finance a just transition, what are the structures in the financial architecture that are holding countries back, and what can we do about breaking down some of those challenges and barriers. We're going to have a tour of 3 different conversations that hopefully will add up to a great scene setting for all of you tonight. So we're going to start with a fireside chat with Laurence Tubiana. Then we'll move into a panel conversation with Audrey Rojkov and Kamal Rambarud, and then close with a fireside chat with Maria Saeed. So you'll meet all those speakers in a moment. But before we start, I just want to take a quick temperature of the room. Put your hand up if you feel this is a conversation you know very little about. It's something you maybe have never come across before. They're topics that you are seeing for the first time. Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for being brave and coming into this conversation. Who feels like they have a broad sense of some of the topics around the just transition and the financial architecture? They feel relatively well-versed? And who thinks of themselves as a bit of an expert? Who's working on this every day? There we go. Well, hopefully we can come to you for some questions at the end, sir. So let's kick off then. I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Laurence Tubiana, and I'll introduce her more properly when she comes up. Thank you, Laurence. Thank you for being here, Laurence, with us. Laurence really needs no introduction in this room, but I will give you a short introduction to her for any of you who are new to this space. Laurence is the CEO of the European Climate Foundation. She is the Dean of the Paris Climate School at Sciences Po and the co-chair of the Global Solidarity's Levies Task Force. As France's climate ambassador and special representative to COP21, she was one of the key architects of the Paris Agreement. So we're just so delighted to have you here with us tonight. So Laurence, I'm going to ask you to help set the scene a bit. You've been inside this debate for a long time, worked across many countries and with many of the institutions for whom this is their primary work. For people in this room who work in climate, or maybe don't, but don't have as much day-to-day experience on the topic of the just transition, how would you define the debt trap we're in today? Can you help set the scene a bit on what you're seeing?
So thank you for the opportunity to talk to all of you in a moment where we don't know when the bombing of Iran would stop. We don't know where the oil and gas crisis will end. And I think it will be good that we think altogether not only on the economic crisis looming, but as well as what is happening to people in Iran that nobody is taking care of. So I cannot just abstract myself from that particular moment where really the power politics all over the world are really now just neglecting who people are, where we should take care. And the debt trap is, unfortunately, another example of finally in these very troubled times, nobody really cares about what really the basic needs of people are. And in this context, where you see that so many countries are now in such difficult situation, so they have to choose between paying for the debt service or funding health, education, and what is needed in a normal country for the people. So we are in a particular moment where the debt issue was discussed many times. Of course, the lenders are different now. China is a big one, and then the private sector is a major one as well in general. But then the cost of borrowing capital for many countries is very, very high. More than, of course, what France, for example, would borrow at 2 or 3%, maybe a little higher these days. But for India or for Nigeria or for Zambia, for example, the rate is really, really high, much around 10% for some countries. So it's really difficult then to do investment, and then if you don't have the national resources, economic growth, which is very low when you look at the past 10 years, then you see that it is very difficult to not to privilege the debt service and not finally and don't really take care of what you should take care in your own country, at least from the public service point of view. So we are in a quite dramatic moment. The oil crisis now will make this debt trap even higher because the imports are just skyrocketing. And then it's very, very just there. We have seen only the beginning of that. We know that for many countries, the real shock will come in 10 or 15 days when really the stocks will be over. And so it's a really an incredible moment to talk about that. And in a way, the one who are still lending money to all these countries, they are countries that are really focused, or private capital focused on the short term. So we have a disconnect between the needs of development, the situation actually as we see it, and the capacity of all countries to come together just to try to offer a solution. And now the debt is there, and IMF is always monitoring when the next country will not be able to pay and what kind of restructuration they need in a moment where really the space, the fiscal space of countries is very, very limited. So it's more dramatic than we think, because this discussion has been pushed on the side.
I was going to ask you a question about what's changed in the last 12 months on this agenda. You've already answered to some of that. You're making me wonder whether I should be asked what's changed in the last 12 days as we're living in such a deeply disrupted financial system and market. But maybe if we take a step back from after acknowledging the realities of today for the people on the ground experiencing the challenges of that debt trap, who benefits from this system staying as it is, and how in the many spheres of work that you are in today, how do you fight against that? Like, where are our opportunities and scope for change in what is a very risky and difficult context?
Well, of course, who is benefiting from that shock? And I'm not talking about the windfall profit of oil and gas, companies or the producers, but just who is really lending at such a high price? Of course, private capital mainly, because they make countries pay a very high premium, when in reality the risk is probably much lower than what they frame the cost for. At least it's very different among countries, but then the currency risk, everything is valued very, very high. So who's benefiting of that? Private capital, certainly, because anyway, they are the first who are paid back. And some lenders like China, but because they are just focusing on the short term. But it's now a moment where we have to look at it and restructure all this debt that is there, because low-income countries, one after one, are in impossibility to pay back. But what are the solutions? Because it's not only restructuring of the debt and, in a way, alleviating the weight. And there are good ideas when a country is affected by a very big catastrophe, a natural catastrophe like a typhoon, or that now we have clauses in IMF that countries are allowed to stop paying debt to take care of their own people. So that's one element which is important, because the countries need and the people need immediate relief. The second element is we begin to have instruments to see how we can lower the cost of capital. We see from different angles and different initiatives that can use the public money, very scarce, I must say, to guarantee where the private capital could come and then pay less, in general, lower the premium that this private capital is asking for. And these guarantee systems that now years and years we are discussing them, but they are now real offers and real structures that can be put in place with the condition somehow that, and in particular talking about, the investment needed to combat climate change, have this just transition, requires that the multilateral development banks play the game. And it is, of course, a contested field now, where, of course, US being in some of the boards and really not allowing some of the big institutions to go on that direction. Just transition then is threatened by this decision. The third element I think we need to look at is we have to widen the fiscal space to just get the resources on the ground. And of course, you look at the budget of many Western countries. We saw, of course, US backtracking totally for their responsibilities in ODA. So what is the solution now? That's why we are trying to promote solidarity levies, because there is a number of sectors that are, in our understanding, a lot of polluters and really escape most of the tax. That's the case of aviation, that's the case of maritime transport, that's the case of cryptocurrencies, that's the case of many other sectors where, in reality, the wealth is concentrating, but there are no sharing of responsibility over time. So that's why I think it's good we initiate a new reflection. It's not a new one, but we put in place, for example, what we are, advocating for, that the premium flyers, the one who fly business class or first class or the private jet, should pay their fair share, and they are not. So it's really for, even on the social justice point of view, is no reason that people, whoever they are in South Africa or Brazil or France, they pay tax on their gasoline for bringing their children at school, and the private jet don't pay anything. So that's not logical again. So I do think as well these guarantees, these solidarity levies, and then we have to do a debt swaps. It's a promising instrument. We can offer national investment in exchange of these debt swaps. So that values, it was always very small amounts until now. I think it's a big avenue, at least for the lenders can do that. The problem is who owns the lending, who owns the land now. And the problem is that it has changed. It's not the same countries. That was G7 is much, much less relevant for this debt management, even if France can do a lot and will do, hopefully, to try to gather all countries to find a solution. But at the same time, they are different markets. And that's where I think we have to put some responsibility on the financial markets that finally are concentrating all the wealth, and without, in a way, working together with others to alleviate the task. The concentration of wealth, as you know, has skyrocketing since 2021 in the COVID crisis, everywhere, in every country. And that's the problem we are not dealing with. And that's why there is so much support for the Zuckman tax, the tax on the 1%. And I think it's now legitimate because how we can do. There is no other way, because all the fiscal paradise, tax haven that finally reduce even more the capacity of government to tax. So I think there are solutions.
Thank you so much. And we're going to get into some of those other solutions with the speakers a bit later. You talked about the G7, no longer being a space for the right space for some of these solutions to be drawn out and hashed out, given the changing geopolitical landscape. Where else are you putting your attention? What are the other is it in between individual nations? Are you looking to the G20? What are the other groups of organizations and countries where people like yourself and others here can push for some of those solutions in more of a global way?
I think the civil society can do a lot, as well as, in my view, the business sectors that want to invest in just transition. I think we have to team up, because we have to call the government responsibility, of course, and the private capital responsibility. Lucy certainly mentioned all this already. We need to make, in a way, to show that these super benefits that are being concentrated now are not viable. You cannot have this concentration of wealth and all the rest of society that are falling back into poverty. So I think civil society has this role, and many organizations are doing it very well. And then we have to understand that in some countries there are an enormous capacity of savings that are there. No, European savings are going to US bonds. Why don't we invest them into just transition on a more global scene? There is a sovereign wealth fund who can do much more than, of course, initially buying real estate in Paris. That was a norm, or bonds of rich countries, and they could be on supporting the development of the whole planet on this just transition, because of course what we need is basically relatively cheap capital. Mm-hmm. So all this is possible, but we have to change the atmosphere of the conversation. Yeah. We have really to say, you can't just avoid just responsibility. You can't live in a world where the 1% will try to have refugees where everybody will be very, very in difficult situation, and you can't escape the planet. Well, of course, we can go to Mars, that's for sure, but at least
will you
not
be going
for
to
the
Mars?
Majority of the population.
Will you be going to Mars, Laurence?
Yes. I don't want to go, but I'm happy that others go. Really, frankly, that I would be happy to see that.
Well, I think you're calling for a shift in narrative around the conversation of just transition. You're calling for creativity in the way that we think about the different pots of money around the world and how it can be used to address some of these challenges and be pushed into the solutions. And you're calling for other actors who might have traditionally seen themselves as outside of this conversation to find their place and really start putting their money where their mouth is, in the English phrase. So I'm just going to close with one final question to you, Laurence, which is, to a room of engaged climate leaders, what is one misconception about climate finance that you would like to debunk or take down that you see often?
I think the main problem is we always think that climate finance is not development finance. I think that's the main problem. We should not think even about climate finance, but think about just transition and sustainable development again. We need water, we need energy, we need food security. This is about development. We need a development for that, and this development has to be low carbon, because if not, it will not exist anymore in maybe 15 or 20 years. So there is no reason to have this discussion that climate finance should be different. That should be the one, it should be mainstream, and that's why it's so important the alignment on Paris Agreement goals on finance are seen as the alignment on development finance as the same goal. And that's why we are now, last year we celebrate the 10 years of Paris Agreement. We celebrate as well the 10 years of Sustainable Development Goals. And we are forgetting them all the time. So I think that's the moment we reconsider and don't listen only to arms and power, but to people again.
Thank you so much, Laurence. Thank you for being with us.